because it goes on. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really, really Khalil today. Khalil, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited too.
How can a CTO make or break a company, Khalil? I mean, you advise strategically so many CTOs and companies, and you're a CTO yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know you work with companies that need transformation and rapid scaling. So, how can a CTO make or break the business? Can we start exploring that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. If we keep it zoomed out and very simple, I think a CTO can definitely break the business, and I think they can contribute to making the business. I don't think a CTO on their own can make the business, and I mean we can get into that as well.
So tell me a bit more about why can they break it but not necessarily make it on their own. That's really interesting.
Sure. So I think a CTO can easily break a business. Now, it depends on the business, obviously. Any business with a large amount of exposure to technology
Hmm.
needs a CTO who understands, first of all, that it is a business. It's not their like personal playground, right? So this is number one, I think. And this
Yeah.
is where I see a lot of kind of inexperienced CTOs make that mistake.
Tell me a bit more about their own personal playground. That sounds really interesting, and I think you and I are gonna agree on a lot of things going forward. Which actually sometimes I would prefer to disagree. Not too much agreement on LinkedIn, but
Yeah.
let's look into that. What does using the business as their personal playground looks like in your
Mm.
experience?
So a lot of CTOs, especially ones that haven't had kind of like the experience of a larger business or like let's say a PE-backed business, etc.,
Mm,
think the CTO position is like the alpha geek. It's the
yes.
I'm the best engineer, and I need to own all of the architecture and do all of that. And I
Yeah.
think when a CTO gets stuck at that level, they develop a tunnel vision where they're not actually looking at the things that they're supposed to look at, and they're not
Yeah.
doing the job of the CTO. They're being like an engineering director, a lead architect, etc. And I think a lot of people who come from kind of smaller company backgrounds, startups,
Mm,
etc., sometimes struggle to make that shift or even see
mm.
like why it's valuable. They think what they're doing is the most valuable thing they can be doing with their time. And I think this is the trap that people fall into because they don't know.
Mm. Yes, and I think I've also seen, to be honest, CTOs that used to work in a corporation and now
Mm,
they are
mm,
the CTO of the startup. So I'm not sure
mm,
it's just engineers or
mm.
just. I mean, I think it's just someone who open to learning and growing with the role and with
Mm,
the business. I
mm.
think that's
Yeah,
um
yeah. No, it
feel
is.
free to
It
challenge me and disagree if your experience is different because I
no,
actually
look.
welcome challenge. you know
No, it's a mindset shift, right? Because at some point, when you're kind of an engineer or an engineering leader, you're focused very much on the core technology side of things. But a C-level executive, the difference is every C-level executive is responsible for the general health of the business, right? Is responsible for the strategy, for all of that. It's just that, like, for example, as a CTO, you focus on the technology side of things, but it's not your sole responsibility. And I think that's where kind of that disconnect happens, where they think, oh, I'm the CTO, so I need to just focus on the technology. Whereas
Yeah.
actually, you need to build alignment on strategy, budget, operations, everything that allows the building of that technology and enables your team
Mm,
to do it. You would
mm,
have an engineering director or a head of engineering, etc., to do that more detailed work. Because
mm.
if you're doing it yourself, then no one
Yeah.
is doing that other exec side.
Yeah. There's a power gap, isn't there? That's what I
Mm,
find. And
mm,
so let's go back to how a CTO can break the business, right? Because it
mm,
sounds like
mm, mm.
to make it, they always need the other people. But let's see
Yeah.
how they can break it. So in the meantime, we've had a comment from Gavin says, sometimes I wish both of you were wrong, but it's not what I've seen in over 3 decades in IT. Yeah. Thank you, Gavin.
People
I'm glad you
often wish
agree.
I'm wrong, and to be fair, I am often wrong. Like, it's a normal part of being a human, right?
Yeah, we all are. We all are or wrong at one point or another. I think the difference is that we have to be willing to admit when we're
Mm,
wrong and learn from it. Not
mm,
see it as a
mm,
fight or as a,
mm,
oh, I'm less of a person or less intelligent or less worthy now because I was wrong about X, Y, and Z. In fact, I think an executive mindset is of someone who is willing to be proven wrong as long as he gets the business outcome, it makes that happen.
mm.
It doesn't, they're not precious about it. And I think that's it's about the greater good, as you were, rather than just my own personal agenda and my own personal kind of how I look and how I come across. So can we figure out some, perhaps, how a CTO can
Mm.
break a company and things that people should look out for, maybe?
So what we've been talking about now is one of the ways, right? So I think
So the trap
being
of thinking the tech side is the only
no, I
side.
mean being able to admit that you're wrong.
Oh, I
Um,
see. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah.
part of the problem is sometimes people step into, especially people stepping into a CTO role for their first CTO role, for example, or their first CTO role in a specific type of organization. It's
Mm,
natural for us to have imposter syndrome
sure.
and be kind of nervous and defensive about, okay, am I actually performing at that level? But then
Mm.
what that drives is a level of defensiveness where they, like, if they make a mistake, they double down on it because
Yes.
they can't admit to being wrong because they see it as a weakness, and
Yeah.
then they try to fix it like in the background, etc. Whereas actually an experienced CTO, an experienced exec, will recognize they made a mistake, be like, oh, sorry, made a mistake, let's correct it. And
Yeah.
actually, making mistakes are such a natural part of not just learning, but a natural part of business, of
Yes.
like developing a business strategy. No
Yeah.
business comes in and goes like, oh, we have the perfect strategy, and then they nail it the first go around, right? They learn from making mistakes. So
And I
that's number
think
one.
that's spot on. Spot on. Right. Should we go to number two then?
Sure. Okay. How they can ruin a company. Number two,
Yeah.
zooming in too much.
Yes. And also sometimes zooming in, or some of them, because they were told by a coach somewhere to zoom out. And then they constantly
Mm.
just zoom out. They never zoom in at all when there's problems that they need
Yeah.
to zoom in either. So zooming in is
Yeah.
zooming out, isn't it?
I mean, I'm a big proponent of zooming out in general, right? But zooming out doesn't mean not paying attention or not having the checks and balances in place so that
Hmm.
things run well while you're zoomed out. I think
Yes.
that's the key, right? You have to first of all build the processes and the team and the way the team works in a way that I'm a big believer in self-running teams. Okay, so if you
Yeah.
haven't built that, if the team constantly needs your input, then that's where
Yeah.
zooming out will hurt the company.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I mean. I think that what I meant was I'm thinking of a particular person in mind right now that I worked with. They were told by someone they need to zoom out more, so they just zoomed
Mm,
out to the point, like you say, there were no checks and balances. They had no idea
mm,
what's happening
mm,
underneath
mm.
because they were like, "Oh, this is beneath me." Well, yeah, but it's still your responsibility. You need to zoom back in to figure out what's going on and maybe create something there that tells you about issues early, rather than you in everybody else's face. you
I
know.
think I think you're on to hear what the point is. I think it's not actually the zooming in or zooming out. It's understanding your responsibilities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you
Yeah.
do, then you can operate at any level of the zoom without dropping the ball.
Yes, that's spot on. And after we go, by the way, to the third way a CTO can break a business, I'd love to ask you, because I know you do a lot of parachuting in to rescue situations, and I'd love to hear about your approach. How do you do that?
Mm, mm.
How do you start turning the ship around? I'd love to hear about that as
Sure,
well.
sure.
So
And
yeah,
and
third trap. Oh, sorry, go on.
so third trap. Do you want to go do the third trap first, and then we'll do the
Yeah, yeah.
parachuting? Yeah.
Let's do the
Okay.
third
Cool.
trap first, and then do the parachuting in. Well,
Um,
do you have one?
If I'm thinking about it, I think one of the ways a CTO can break a company in terms of like not focusing on the right thing, and it's related to responsibilities and like level of Zoom, but not fully, is ignoring the business drivers. So
Nailed it.
focusing on just the tech first, right? Going like, oh, this is what we
Yeah.
need to build because this is the best way to build it. Well,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, but do you know how many places I see that insist they need 99.9% uptime for no real business reason, just because they've heard that or seen like other
Right.
places have it, and then it ends up
Yeah.
costing like 60-70% more than you actually need to spend. So
Yeah.
that's the whole business driver element, right?
Yeah.
Understanding the business model of the company you're working in, understanding what the stakeholders want, right? What does the board actually want? The people who
Mm.
owns the company, right?
Mm.
That are funding this whole thing. What is the objective? What's the 3-year vision? What's the 5-year vision? How do you enable that with tech? Not how do I build the best tech because it's the best.
Yes, because that's a R&D project, isn't it? An academic
Mm.
project. Oh, how do I build, the best tech?
Yeah,
But
it's the immaturity of it. Yeah.
yes, yes, completely. I agree. And well, this is actually one of Paul Butcher, the former chief software architect of SwiftKey. He said once, and I
Mm.
added this in one of my posts. He said something about, one of the traps CTOs fall into is that they think they need to hold their own technology to some sort of industry standard. Back to
Mm.
your point about the 99%, that may or may not be relevant to them. But again, they're looking at the wrong drivers, isn't it? So
Mm.
let's talk about parachuting in, because I love that. I know this is a special
Yeah.
area of yours where
Yeah.
companies are in dire need of someone to turn the ship around from the engineering perspective, at least.
Mm.
What's your approach? How do you start saving, so making that company rather than after it's been broken?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too mean to the places I've worked in, right? Because I don't think it's so much like parachuting in to save like a company. It's more the transformation aspect, right? Every
Yeah, yeah,
company in some point of its life cycle needs a transformation.
yeah.
Um, I am unlucky enough to have just found myself constantly kind of doing that when I was like progressing through the levels of engineering and engineering leadership and stuff. And then I started doing a lot of being a CTO with startups and stuff. And startups often, they need that oomph. So you learn the hard way, right? You learn by
Yeah.
making mistakes. And
Yes.
I think I've made enough mistakes that I know all of the mistakes someone can make.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm
Brilliant.
good at what I do now.
Love
It's
it.
it's about and look, I enjoy the reward of it. It's a very rewarding feeling when you're somewhere for like even just like 9 months and you see a
Hmm.
complete turnaround, right? The team is
Yeah.
performing better, their morale is better, their
Yeah.
psychological safety is better, the business is going well, you've like saved them 70% cost
Nice.
margins, and like things
Nice.
like that. That's what drives me to like really enjoy what I'm doing. And so it's not for everyone, but
No.
yeah,
Well, because you're going to battle, really. I mean, you're going
you
to
are,
a kind
yeah.
of an. So, what would you say is your approach? Like, what do you
Mm,
do in the first stages? Do you
mm,
start by speaking to the engineers, or do you
mm.
start by speaking to the business and the other departments to see the impact of engineering on them? What's your process?
The answer is yes. uh,
Damn it.
no, I have a process. So I do usually a 2-week ish discovery.
Hmm.
And what I do is I package it up usually as a fixed price thing and go
Hmm.
like, look, I'll produce a report for you at the end of this. You get value out of the discovery. I'm not just playing around doing nothing. And then
Hmm.
if you agree with it, if you see the value, I can help you implement this, or I can find someone who can do it for you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I do. And I do start with, first of all, doing a tech review architecture, the usual stuff of is it fit for what the business is doing, also not
Mm.
in terms of, hey, is this good in abstract? Then I talk to the team. I have a background in psychology. I judge their psychological safety. Are they being enabled to perform? Are they just constantly stressed out and at the peak of what they can handle? And then I talk to management. I talk to kind of like the different layers of management, see how they handle people. Often it's a lot more about process and people and psychological safety than it is about the core technology. Because
Yeah.
core technology you can always change, you can always fix.
Mm. 100%. We have a question from Nick at the moment. Says,
Mm,
Khalil, what is the typical situation you find when getting parachuted in?
mm,
What's the most common problem you're asked to solve?
mm,
Excellent question, Nick. Thank you for
mm.
that.
Common problem is it's not usually one problem, to be honest. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
more always a common root of the problem, and that root is that the processes are broken or there is like a major layer missing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's say companies that don't believe that you need to have any kind of delivery function at all, or even build it into any other function, or the developers are constantly focused on very short-term goals of we need to deliver this in that time, and they're not being listened to in terms of why we can't. It's
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So often it's different causes, but usually it's someone who's frustrated in like, okay, this isn't working. We're always having the same issues. And I think to have a succinct answer for Nick, I think it's usually quality of output, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's usually, our system keeps falling over, or we have so many bugs in production, we can barely keep up, or we're not being able to achieve our kind of plan for the year, for the 2 years. So it's always starts with the quality of output, but then when you
Mm-hmm.
dig in, you find what the root cause of the problem with the quality of output is.
Mm. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So, and what would you say? You mentioned earlier about the process and about the devs being focused on short-term goals. I mean, that sounds like most CTOs I've met in scale-ups, right?
Mm.
Um, why do CTOs fall into those traps? In kind of, I mean, I think we're back to the things that we said earlier, but I'd love to hear your perspective as to why do we see the same mistakes over and over and over again?
I think there's two different categories that in my experience, I've found. One is people who are inexperienced and have imposter syndrome and overcompensate and then get tunnel vision and get blinkered. And then just don't know how to deal with the exact side of things where they see. And usually the key sign of that is when the CTO is telling you how like they're the victim in all of it, right?
Yes.
Like I tell this to the CEO, I tell this to the board, and they don't
Yeah.
listen,
Yeah.
or like they blame me, but it's not my fault because I did this and this and that.
Yeah.
That's a sign of that aspect.
Yeah.
The other is different. The other is someone who knows what needs to be done and what's right, but is overwhelmed. Is
Mm.
overwhelmed by either the scale of things, the timelines, and is either like reluctant to actually frame the problem well for the rest of the business, or
Mm.
like some people just don't have the necessary kind of communication skills. Like they get into the
Mm.
exec board, they get into the boardroom, and they're talking about the technical details because that's how what they understand, but that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily get your message across of what's actually okay. So how can we help? You're the technical guy, and then they
Yes.
feel they're being picked on, right?
Yes.
Actually, they're just not communicating the right help, right? Ask questions.
Yeah.
They like, hey,
Yeah.
I need to understand this, or I need support in this.
Yeah. The I I was interviewed at the CTO Academy on this, and there's a recording of me on Spotify
Mm,
where I almost feel like I'm having a go at CTOs
mm,
because I'm frustrated with this victim mentality and victim
mm.
approach. When they go, oh, the CEO asked us to do this, and me and the engineers are these poor little workers that are forced to do things in a particular way, and I'm going, no, you are part of the exec. They are treating
That's
you
exactly
top
it.
down
Mm,
because you are acting top down. You're acting as
mm,
someone who's
mm.
down there.
Me and the
They,
engineers is the problem,
yes,
right?
yeah,
Your
yeah,
team, I'm sorry to all of the CTOs who don't believe this, but your team is not the engineering team. Your team is the C suite.
yes,
That
yes,
doesn't mean you ignore the engineering team. Obviously, you have a duty of care to them, but
yes,
they're not your core team. And if you treat the C-suite as being, not your core team, that's where the disconnect happens. You're not engaging with them as a unit.
Yeah, spot on. And that's the thing, that when you that executive mindset is when you, because often they say, well, yeah, but they don't see me. In fact, I had this comment from a CEO at my lecture at Oxford last week. One of the CEOs said to me, yeah, but my CTO doesn't want to get involved in business. And I said, why doesn't he or she? And he said, oh. And I said, because they don't understand what you're talking about. They haven't made that mental transition. And he said afterwards, I completely made him rethink the way he thinks of engineering in their business. But this is the thing, that of course the CEO will take the signal from you. If you act like an engineer in the C-suite, they will see you as an engineer in the C-suite. To be fair as well, though, what I've noticed, and I'd like you to challenge me if you disagree with this, what I've noticed is that in some traditional industries, a lot of hardware industries, I'd say, they do see the CTO more like an engineer than more in more software. What would you say? Have you seen that? I don't know if you
It's
have
usually
experience of
in
that.
bigger companies, in big multinationals, kind of like large enterprise, where that can happen. Yes.
Yeah.
But that's a different challenge completely, right? Because kind of when you're in that role, you're expecting that type of structure, because like even sometimes the CEO isn't really a CEO. They're like a cog in the machine, where actually the chairman is really the one running things, etc.
Yes.
But that's like
Yeah.
in very much larger enterprise. If that's happening in kind of a smaller company, even if it's a smaller multinational, then I think it's more of a sign of, well, is the role structured properly, or are you kind of encouraging that kind of behavior?
Well, so this is, I actually have a recording with a 54-year experienced top quality engineer who never became CTO, and he hid his identity, but I will release
That's
that
a lucky
soon.
person.
Yeah, and he never became a CTO, and he was saying, why haven't I become a CTO? Because I did sales, I think like an executive, like. And I said to him, actually, from looking at your background and everything you've done, because he said that he was too precious to his company to be made CTO when he asked them. You stay here in your little bench and do your little designs, right? Prototypes, etc. And I said to him, yeah, but you never made the business case of why you should be CTO. You never said that you'll mentor the other inexperienced engineers to do what you're doing at scale. And he went, uh-oh, spot on.
Not just
Never did
about the
that.
tech.
Not so about the tech. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have another comment from Nick. Says, thank you, Khalil. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you know where the problem is, but the CEO/C-suite doesn't want to listen or believe? How do you get the message across when that happens? Oh, that's a great question, and I'm happy.
That question is a trap. And I'll tell you why it's a trap. It's because it's the way it's framed, right? It's taking for granted that the CEO/C-suite doesn't want to listen or believe. But actually, is that the case? Or is the case that you're not communicating properly in a way that they will listen and believe, right? Because there's always, you have to think about kind of all of the stressors and priorities a CEO has, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes part of the problem is this: if the CEO feels that they have to get too hands-on with something, they can't trust the CTO, this is when this happens. So I think, CEOs in general, they want things to work because that's what they do. It's them on the line. Ultimately, it's not the CTO. The way you make that happen is you tailor your communication to the right audience, right? It's hard. It's a skill that you need to learn. One of the things that I find useful is when you're communicating, let's say, technical stuff, use allegories, use analogies. Don't talk about the tech. So, for example, one time I was explaining a really kind of complex AI system to kind of like a head of marketing, etc. And the way I drew the diagram is I had a brain, I had hands, I had eyes, and I was like, this system is the brain, this system does that. And at the end, he was like, this is the first time I understand the technical diagram, right? And
Nice.
no, honestly, it's like, it's about tailoring your message. If you find that you are having that problem consistently, it's a warning sign that you're not tailoring your message to the right audience. And there are ways to learn how to do that, right? There's something called data-driven storytelling, which I find really powerful. Are you familiar with it, Adelina?
Is that the one where you have like GIFs as well? You can create where you show kind of the
Yeah,
transitions through time and.
I think for me, it's a bunch of principles, right? It's first of all, understand your audience and what they know and what they don't know, and frame your message as a story. Like that's why it's data-driven storytelling, right? So have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Have a climax and have a lesson to be learned out of it. And when you're showing data, do it in an engaging way, and use like funny images, use things like that. Just make it very human. I think it's the only way to really communicate to people who are not connected to the technology at a visceral level like you are.
I mean, I think Nick's question is really. I think what you said is true, and I would say as well. Let's say you have communicated it in a human way, and you have spent. Because I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I told you this, but gosh, back in 2014, I created a paper teaching people how to present boring abstract data in a way that makes sense to business people. And exactly like you say, I mean, I didn't have this exact wording you describing data-driven storytelling, but it was literally saying you have to have a point of despair, you have to point the twist,
Yeah.
you have to have all of that, the hero's journey, etc. And but coming back to Nick's question, I would say as well that sometimes, let's say you have a brilliant presentation, they still don't believe you,
Yeah.
then that tells me the trust has been broken somewhere.
Yes.
There is no trust left.
Yeah.
Therefore, there has to be someone like Khalil coming externally for
Mhm.
them to hear perhaps the same thing, but
Mhm.
from someone
Mhm.
now that they have
Mhm.
a fresh relationship
Mhm.
with, even though it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And you as the CTO might go, what the hell? I just said that. Sometimes you think you said it, and actually you might not have said it in the way they get it. But sometimes also it could be that you did say it, but because of things that might have happened in the lead up to that meeting or that presentation, the trust is so shredded now that they still don't quite believe it. And once trust is broken, it's even when you repair it, it still has those cracks in the ball.
Yeah. I agree. And I think if you find this happening repeatedly, then you need to examine why is the trust not there, right? What happened? Is it that you keep saying things are going to happen that don't happen? Is it because
broken promises?
because people don't just lose trust for no reason, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes there's personality issues, right? But that's actually rare. In the situations that I've looked at where there are genuine personality issues, it's been like maybe 1%, right? Usually it's more based on someone's experience with someone else. And just break that pattern, right? Or have a frank conversation. Go like, look, we have this issue. Why is it happening? And really listen. Take on board the feedback and be kind of self-aware enough to go, oh, okay, put yourself in the other person's shoes. Again, it's the whole like not being defensive thing. When you're operating at a C-level as well, you need to be really self-critical and be able to take feedback and make changes, because it's not just about, oh, how good you are. It's also about how do these people want to work as a team. And sometimes I need to adjust the way I work to fit in with the way these people want to work as a team. If you don't want to do that, you shouldn't really be doing a C-level job. And by the way, it's not the ultimate, like, it's not the path. You don't have to be a CTO, right? You can be a really great engineer, have a career path that's amazing, fulfilling, just as well paid or even more, and not have to deal with this stuff.
Yes.
When people ask me, how do I become a CTO? I usually say, don't. It's not a pleasant job. It really isn't. You have to be a special, like a kind of person to want it even.
I think you're spot on. It's a really hard job because it involves a lot of psychology actually, and it involves taking responsibility for other people's performance that you are accountable for, And ultimately, you recruited them maybe, or someone else recruited them, and you're just starting out. So you're now dealing with this pain of a person that someone else recruited, but he or she is your responsibility.
Yeah, and you still have to take the bullets.
And you still have to
it's
take the
your
bullets.
responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very excellent questions, Nick. Thank you so much. I'm sure other people want to ask those questions, and I love them. Absolutely spot on. And there are questions on a lot of CTOs' minds, I think. So thank you for speaking out on that. I can't believe we've run out of time, Khalil. We could talk, I think, till the cows come home. Thank you so much for your input. Absolutely love your directness and frankness and transparency. I think you and I are kindred spirits in lots of ways.
Yeah, I do think so.
Well, I'm so delighted because it was Ricardo who recommended you and I have a chat. So I'm really grateful to Ricardo.
Thank you. Ricardo's a very good friend of mine. We started out in kind of architecture together, and he's a very dear friend.
He's wonderful. Just a comment from Gavin: you are not an authority; you earn authority. Yeah, spot on. Absolutely.
100%.
Nick says, thank you both. Brilliant answers. Thank you so much, Nick. Gavin says, great chat, the both of you. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate your comments and ideas and questions and support.
Yeah, great questions, honestly.
Excellent. Brilliant question. I love the questions. Always love the questions. So grateful to Nick and Gavin for theirs.
And thanks for having me, Adelina. I really enjoyed this chat.
Wonderful. Let's do it again. Let's do it again then.
Yeah, definitely.
Have a wonderful